All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into the hidden world of protists. We're going to explore a kingdom of life that is entirely bizarre, absolutely beautiful, and, as you'll see a bit later, sometimes utterly terrifying.
Picture this. You're watching a nature documentary, but the jungles are microscopic, the mechanics of movement are totally alien, and the predators are completely invisible to the naked eye. That's the world we're diving into today. But before we even get out our microscopes, I want to ask you a quick question to test your biological intuition. Are all single-celled organisms actually microscopic? I mean, when we hear the phrase single-celled, our brains naturally default to tiny invisible specks floating in a drop of pond water, right? We just assume that one cell equals something you can only see through a high-powered lens.
Well, take a look at this. This absolute unit of an organism is called Valonia ventricosa. It's commonly known as bubble algae, sea grapes, or, my personal favorite, sailor's eyeballs. What you are looking at, resting right there in the palm of that hand, is just one single cell. No way, right? It literally blows my mind every single time I see it. It completely shatters the illusion that single-celled always has to mean invisible. As you can see by this giant bubble, this group of organisms features a wild range of shapes and sizes. It just proves that life absolutely doesn't always play by the rules we expect it to.
So, what exactly is a protist? Well, the crucial point here is that protist is actually kind of an informal name. They're a highly diverse group of eukaryotic organisms, meaning their cells have a distinct enclosed nucleus, but they lack specialized tissues. Biologically speaking, scientists call them a polyphyletic group. That's just a fancy term meaning they don't actually share a single common evolutionary origin. They are literally the ultimate biological misfits. Basically, if you're a eukaryotic, but you're not an animal, you're not a plant, and you're not a fungus, congratulations, you get thrown right into the protist category.
Okay, so let's see how this builds out practically. Scientists are currently trying to map out this wildly chaotic domain into 6 massive supergroups: Excavata, Chromalvolata, Rhizaria, Archaeoplastida, Amoebazoa, and Opisthocanta. It's a hugely complex family tree based on proposed evolutionary relationships. You'll notice those dotted lines connecting some of the branches? Those actually represent areas where the evolutionary history is still a subject of active, ongoing debate among researchers. It's like a giant biological puzzle that we're still figuring out.
What's truly mind-boggling about this group, though, is the sheer diversity of lifestyles. On one hand, you have an animal like protist, specifically Trichomonas, which actively moves around and hunts for prey, just like an animal predator would. But then, look at the other side. See that towering, majestic underwater forest bathed in sunlight? That is a plant-like protist. It's kelp. They're multicellular, they carry out photosynthesis, and they create massive, complex ecosystems. Yet, both the tiny microscopic hunter and the giant kelp fall under the exact same protist umbrella.
For the microscopic members of this group, navigating their fluid world requires some truly fascinating mechanics. Let's bring these microbes to life for a second. The paramecium is covered in these sweeping, hair-like appendages called cilia that beat in a rhythm to move it around. Then you have the amoeba, which uses what are called Pseudopodia, which literally translates to false feet. It extends these lobe-like structures to anchor itself to a surface and then physically pulls its internal endoplasm forward in this constant shape-shifting motion. And then the euglena uses a long whip-like tail called a flagellum to rapidly propel itself forward, kind of like a tiny little motorboat.
Now, once they've moved to where they want to be, they got to eat, right? And again, they do this in incredibly diverse ways. We generally divide them into holozoic hunters and saprozoic scavengers. Holozoic protists, like the amoeba or the paramecium with its primitive oral groove, actually ingest whole food particles through a process called phagocytosis. They essentially swallow their microscopic prey completely whole. On the flip side, saprozoic protists, like water molds, are the scavengers. They feed on dead organic material by secreting enzymes outward into their environment. These enzymes break down the large organic materials into smaller ones that the protist can then just simply absorb.
While we're talking about their biological output, let's look at a massive data point that really puts their global impact into perspective. 25%. I want you to think about taking 4 deep breaths right now. Ready? Okay, one of those entire breaths was provided to you by a protist, specifically photosynthetic marine phytoplankton, like diatoms. These autotrophic protists are responsible for a full quarter of all the oxygen produced on planet Earth. That is huge!
And this brilliantly illustrates their absolutely crucial importance as the ecological anchor of our oceans. What we have here is a giant whale shark, literally one of the largest, most majestic giants on the planet, feeding on tiny crustaceans like copepods and krill. But what do those crustaceans eat? They feed on phytoplankton, including those diatoms we just talked about. These drifting, precision-engineered, tiny floating protists form the foundational bedrock of the food chain. Without them, the largest giants in our oceans simply could not exist.
But, this hidden world isn't just beautiful and globally beneficial. It definitely has a much darker arc. 3.4 billion. That is the staggering number of people worldwide whose health and lives are threatened by a parasitic protist called Plasmodium. This is the intracellular parasite that's actually responsible for malaria, transmitted through the bite of a mosquito. It's a major cause of morbidity and mortality across the globe, proving, quite terribly, that you really don't need to be a large predator to be incredibly deadly.
Let's look at the profile of another killer in this hidden true crime saga, Trypanosoma brucei. This parasitic protist is the cause of human African sleeping sickness. Its modus operandi relies on a very specific insect accomplice. It's transmitted to humans by the tsetse fly. Once a human is bitten, these parasites rapidly invade the bloodstream. But the real terror of this disease is its final destination. It ultimately crosses over to entirely hijack the human central nervous system.
And then, we have a protist you might actually know by its terrifying media moniker, Naegleria fowleri, the brain-eating amoeba. The mechanics of how this protist operates are just chilling. It forms cysts and basically waits in contaminated warm water. If you go for a swim and get that water pushed up into your nose, the parasite enters your body. It causes severe inflammation and symptoms that are really similar to meningitis and encephalitis. It is stunningly aggressive, with 95% of victims passing away within just 4 to 5 days of exposure.
Finally, let's examine Toxoplasma gondii. What makes this parasitic protist so uniquely insidious is its bizarre domestic life cycle. It starts out in nature getting picked up from the soil by birds or rodents, but it ultimately finds its primary host in everyday domestic cats. From there, it can be easily transmitted to humans. While it can invade almost all mammalian cells, the real danger here is to vulnerable populations. In pregnant women, it can attack fetal tissues, causing severe neurological damage, retinal lesions, and even spontaneous abortion. In immunocompromised patients, it attacks the brain tissue directly, causing seizures and death.
It's a pretty sobering reminder of the invisible ecosystems interacting with us every single day. So, I want to leave you with this thought to ponder. If a parasite like Toxoplasma gondii can thrive completely invisibly in the everyday domestic life of our own pets, what else might be living, multiplying, and evolving right under your nose? The hidden world is always out there, waiting to be understood. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.